The Juche philosophy is an original revolutionary philosophy. This is a discord published in Kuloja, which is the official magazine of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea from 1996. An opinion has recently been raised that some of our social scientists has expressed a wrong view contrary to our party's idea in explaining the Juche philosophy, and that this view has been disseminated abroad as well. These social scientists still attempt to explain the basic principles of the Juche philosophy from the point of view of the general law of the development of the material world, instead of explaining them in the direction of clarifying the law of social movement. The proponents of this view say that their argument is aimed at proving that the Juche philosophy is a new development also of Marxist materialistic dialectics. In explaining and propagating the Juche philosophy, we do not need to convince people that the Juche philosophy is a new development of Marxist materialistic dialectics. It is true that our party has not taken a dogmatic approach to Marxist materialistic dialectics, but analyzed it from the point of view of Juche, and has given new explanations to a number of problems. However, some development of materialism and dialectics does not constitute the basic content of the Juche philosophy. The Juche philosophy is an original philosophy which has been evolved and systematized with its own principles. The historic contribution made by the Juche philosophy to the development of philosophical thought lies not in its advancement of Marxist materialistic dialectics, but in its clarification of new philosophical principles centered on humanity. The Marxist philosophy raised the relationship between material and consciousness, between being and thinking, as the fundamental question of philosophy, and proved the primacy of material, the primacy of being, and on this basis elucidated that the world is made of material, and changed and developed by the motion of material. The Juche philosophy has raised the relationship between the world and humanity, the humanity's position and role in the world, as the fundamental question of philosophy. Clarified the philosophical principle that humanity is the master of everything and that he decides everything, and on this basis illuminated the absolutely correct way of shaping humanity's destiny. The Marxist philosophy raised as its major task the clarification of the essence of the material world and the general law of its motion, whereas the Juche philosophy has raised as its important task the elucidation of humanity's essential characteristics and the law of social development, humanity's development. Therefore, the Juche philosophy is an original philosophy, which is fundamentally different from the preceding philosophy in its task and principles. That is why we should not understand the Juche philosophy as a philosophy that has developed materialistic dialectics. Nor should we attempt to prove the originality and advantages of Juche philosophy by arguing one way or the other about the essence of the material world and the general law of its motion, which were clarified by the Marxist philosophy. You cannot explain the Juche philosophy in the framework of the preceding philosophy because it is a philosophy that has clarified new philosophical principles founded on the premise of that preceding philosophy. If you attempt to do so, you will not only fail to prove the originality of Juche philosophy, but instead make it obscure and fail to understand the essence of Juche philosophy correctly. Having defined the essential qualities of humanity for the first time in history, the Juche philosophy has held up humanity as the best and qualified, the most powerful being in the world, and advanced a new idea on the world, that the world is dominated and transformed by man, Now, the best qualified and most powerful is not to, again, say that it just dominates all the other things and superior in all this way. It means the best qualified and most powerful in a way to smash the nihilistic and the post Marxist viewpoints, which sees man as just this, either a commodity or as this helpless being that can't affect any change in its society and therefore don't even try. It's to fight the Francis Fukuyamas and the other and the fucking and the Zizeks and all of these fucking bourgeois bogus post-Marxist philosophers. That's what it's aimed at. The new outlook on the world established by Juche philosophy does not deny the world outlook of dialectical materialism. The Juche philosophy regards the world outlook of dialectical materialism as its premise. The Juche view of the world, that the world is dominated and transformed by humanity, is inconceivable separately from the materialistic dialectical understanding of the essence of the objective material world and the general laws of its motion. Oh, why is that? Well, it's from understanding dialectical materialism and understanding other objective natural laws that we're able to make use of those laws for our benefit. Because from the idealistic view that the world is something mysterious, you cannot draw the conclusion that humanity dominates the world. And from the metaphysical view that the world is immutable, you cannot infer that humanity can transform the world. The Juche view of the world, that the world is dominated and transformed by humanity, can only be established when the materialistic dialectical understanding of the world, that the world is made of material and ceaselessly changes and develops, is recognized. In spite of a number of limitations and immaturities of the Marxist materialistic dialectics, its basic principles are scientific and valid. That is why we say that the Juche philosophy regards materialistic dialectics as its premise. That the world outlook of the materialistic dialectics is the premise for the Juche philosophy does not mean that the Juche philosophy has merely inherited and developed the materialistic dialectics. Although it would be impossible to acquire a scientific understanding of the world and transform it without the materialistic dialectical understanding of the objective material world, you cannot draw the conclusion that humanity is the master of the world and plays the decisive role in transforming the world, simply from the proposition of materialism, that the world is made of material, and from the dialectical principle that the world ceaselessly changes and developed. Now again, I'm going to pause here and say, Kim Jong-il here is not saying that Marx didn't understand that. He's not saying that Leninism didn't understand that. He's simply saying that if they did not creatively interpret their own principles that they were putting forth, then in mechanically interpreting their principles, you can overlook this aspect, which unfortunately actual leaders of the revolution did, which led to an overthrow of the biggest fucking socialist country that existed, right? The biggest tragedy of humanity. Because yes, while we should absolutely give a lot of credit to the United States and the CIA and all these other forces for all the tireless work they did in undermining it, at the same time, the continued existence of China and of US and DPRK and of Cuba proves that it wasn't inherent in socialism and it wasn't some mistake of USSR like that was made. It was the real problem was the actual distortion of the revolutionary principles, right? The abandonment of Marxist Leninism, etc. Like that, the actual problem that led to it able to be overthrown to begin with was these internal problems that developed, especially a dogmatic and flunkiest viewpoint. So it's very important to understand that. Lots of support to the CIA for its role in doing that, but the continued existence of China DPRK shows that that could have been overcome if it had good leadership and was developing creative Marxist theory for its particular conditions. Only on the basis of the clarification of humanity's essential qualities, which distinguish humanity radically from all other material beings, can humanity's position and role as master of the world, capable of transforming the world, be clarified. Juche philosophy is very compelling, especially in material terms, but is there a hazard around the importance of valuable leadership? Much seems to hinge on the sole pinnacle leader in the practical example of DPRK. No, that would be a misreading of the the way that gets misread is treating the leader as like an individual and somebody that has to give advice as an individual. When really you have to, in order to understand what the role of leader in Juche, you really do have to understand the Juche analysis and the Juche understanding of leadership, which is really, again, it's taken from examining all the other revolutions that have taken place, like the leadership of Stalin and Lenin and everyone else, and demonstrates that like leaders, the proper leaders of the revolution, like Stalin, like Lenin before, they give guidance to the revolution. They don't lead by command and decree. Right? The leader is the leader doesn't like give guidance as some individual, but from being surrounded by a collective of other very class conscious and very knowledgeable revolutionaries. The leader is merely the symbol of like where the party is at the time. It's the symbol of that what the collective leadership has agreed upon. That's what the leader is. So in that way, the leader is a reflection of the party, which is a reflection of the masses. So it's not like Kim Il-sung like decides everything by himself, and people know that. Like people know that there's a difference between the leaders who represent the masses and the leader is an individual who is doing his job. And I can actually show you some clips that will demonstrate that as well when we're done this read. But yeah, that comes from like a misframing of how they understand leadership to be. Because think about it this way. Even though, like, forget the nuclear clause that they just put in, right? But if Kim Jong-un was not doing his job and he had to be outed, or if he was assassinated, or whatever it was, if Kim Jong-un was gone today, do you think the revolution in Korea would just end? No, I don't. I think it would continue exactly the same as it is right now, because it has a cadre system. And even the leadership would continue on as it is now. Likely they have like prominent people that they would put up, in fact, to be elected. Well, all DPRK says is that the succession of leadership should be solved before the current leader is gone. Whether whatever, killed or whatever it is, that there should be some kind of plan. Because for example, the reason why DPRK suggests that is because Lenin suggested that Stalin be elected. And basically the lack of that after Stalin died led to this like fighting for power, right? And the reason why that's a good thing to do is because it's not up to the leadership or these individuals to choose, but it's up to the masses themselves to choose. So that's why Lenin suggests this, and if the majority of the party agree with it, they vote for Stalin, which they did, including Trotsky. USSR is much the same way. It's because there's an understanding that it's a collective leadership, so it's not really Kim Jong-un making all the decisions, right? It's the collective It's the collective SAC or the collective Central Committee that's making all the decisions. But they give the credit to Kim Jong-un because, again, communism is not about trying to take credit. Communism is not about being the most famous communist philosopher. Communism is about building a better society for everybody. So all the credits give to Kim Il-sung as the representative of all the people is like just a way to... He's the representative of this period. And, you know what I mean? So the names of all these party members are known, but like the credit for like these speeches and stuff is like given to Kim Il-sung for the collective decisions of the party. It's given to Kim Il-sung. And the reason that's done is because people rally much more easy behind a symbol, behind a person, than a symbol, right? Because even before everybody is made into communists, they can understand a leader that has been fighting to fulfill the promises of a party. Mama, thank you so much for the host. Welcome in, everybody. Everybody go follow Mama M Media on the green side. Best gaming streamer. Welcome in. I'm just talking about Juche philosophy and Kim Il-sung. So yeah, just, you gotta understand, I guess, that like it's not really people understand even their own leadership in a whole different way. I hope that makes sense. It's really, it's a complicated thing to try and explain. It's why I always like to wheel out this one quote every fucking time. I have this one quote that I bring out every single time because it shows you that they're not the only ones talking about this and understanding this as well, right? Like, look, listen to this. This is from Che Guevara. Think about this now in the context of what I just said about DPRK. Actually, I'm going to read it this way. Okay, think about these two quotes in the context of what I just said about the leadership in DPRK, okay? Okay? In the history of the Cuban Revolution, there now appeared a character, well defined in its features, which would systematically reappear. The mass. This multifaceted being is not, as is claimed, the sum of elements of the same type, reduced moreover to that same type by the ruling system. In other words, they're not a monolith, which acts like a flock of sheep. Right? He's saying they're not that. That's the claim. But that's not what the masses are. It is true that it follows its leaders. Basically, Fidel Castro, without hesitation. But the degree to which he has won this trust results precisely from interpreting the full meaning of the people's desires and aspirations, and from the sincere struggle to fulfill the promises he made. In this, Fidel is a master. His own special way of fusing himself with the people can only be appreciated by seeing him in action. At the great public mass meetings, one can observe something like a dialogue of two tuning forks whose vibrations interact, producing new sounds. Fidel and the mass begin to vibrate together in a dialogue of growing intensity until they reach the climax in an abrupt conclusion crowned by our cry of struggle and victory. The difficult thing to understand for someone not living through the experience of the revolution is this close dialectical unity between the individual and the mass, in which both are interrelated, and at the same time in which the mass, as an aggregate of individuals, interacts with its leaders. So that's how Che Guevara explains the relationship between the leaders in a socialist country and the masses of the socialist country. And now he's going to give an example of how this kind of phenomena can be seen in temporary glimpses in capitalism. And now think about people that this applies to, right? Bernie Sanders, AOC, Zoran Mamdani, okay? Falls into what he's about to say right now, I would say. So he then goes on and says, some phenomena of this kind can be seen under capitalism, when politicians appear capable of mobilizing popular opinion. But when these are not genuine social movements, and if they were, it would not be entirely correct to call them capitalists, they live only so long as the individual who inspires them. or until the harshness of capitalist society puts an end to people's illusions. Che Guevara. So you see, it's not just a DPRK leadership theory. What Juche is really talking about is the leadership under socialism as it really exists. Right? And that's a characteristic of socialism that occurs naturally. And the denial of that and the fighting against that is actually harmful to the revolution. And that's why Kim Jong-il sums it up really, really quickly, really succinctly in this one sentence here. Between the leader in a socialist society, between the leader and his fighters, or I guess in a democratic, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist movement, not just in a socialist society, I should say, but between the leader and his fighters, and between the leader and his people, there exists not a relationship of domination and obedience, but only the duty of love and return for that love, in that the party acts as a motherly party that loves the people and wants to fulfill all the promises to raise the people's living standards. And the people feel the love of the party, and then they want to give that love back to the party. And the best way for the party to reflect itself is not in a symbol, but in a human face, because that's what people rally behind. People don't rally behind a hammer and sickle. They don't rally behind a particular symbol or an object across different social lines and different social understandings, right? Even people with still aspects of false consciousness can be rallied behind a leader who has fought for their interests. I thought they weren't allowed to use the word love. I mean, that's what's so funny about that quote is like Juche is like all about love. Juche takes like Che's quote about like, for me, communist has to have a big heart, right? For me, communist is about like being guided by feelings of great love. Well, DPRK takes that further. That's it. Thank you, Frank. The true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love. It is impossible to think of a genuine revolutionary lacking this quality. And then Kim Jong-il takes this a step further and says the aim of revolution itself, the aim of revolution itself is to bring love for the people into bloom. You know? It's just fucking good. Such a good, I love that saying. One of my favorite quotes. All right, I'll continue. Only on the basis of the clarification of humanity's essential qualities, which distinguish humanity radically from all other material beings, can humanity's outstanding position and role as master of the world, capable of transforming the world, be clarified. Only on the basis of humanity's essential qualities as a social being with independence, creativity, and consciousness, as scientifically clarified by the Juche philosophy, has the basic principle that humanity is the master of the world and plays the decisive role in transforming the world been clarified. By establishing the Juche outlook on social history, the Juche view of history on the basis of the human-centered philosophical principle, the Juche philosophy has overcome limitations of the preceding socio-historical view and effected a radical change on the socio-historical standpoint. Yes, even in other countries' use of historical materialism, including the Black Panthers. Marxist philosophy established socio-historical view of dialectical materialism, called historical materialism, through the application of the general law of the development of the material world of social history. Now, of course, we Juche followers do not deny the historic merit of historical materialism. Historical materialism made an important contribution to defeating the reactionary and unscientific socio-historical view, which was based on idealism and metaphysics. In addition, since humanity lives in the objective material world, and society is inseparably linked with nature, the general law of the development of the material world acts on social phenomena, hence explaining Marxism's correctness. However, if you overlook the social movement being governed by its own law and apply the general law of the development of material world mechanically to social phenomena, you cannot avoid acquiring a one-sided understanding of social history. Looking at you, Khrushchev. So he's not saying that this is the inherent outlook of historical materialism. He's saying that if you interpret historical materialism mechanically, then it is possible to have this misinterpretation. And all the Juche view of history seeks to do is correct that limitation. Correct that ability to misuse it. That's all he's doing. That's what it means. It's not saying historical materialism is wrong. It's not saying it's defunct or whatever else, right? What it's saying is that it has this particular limitation that was more readily revealed in the historical struggle to protect the principles of Marxism-Leninism in the revolution. And therefore, the better we understand this as a phenomena, as a thing, then the better we can make revolution understanding that. And I always like to point out, of course, that, there is that quote by the Black Panther Party, who a lot of people like to say they're Maoists. Oh, they were Marxist-Leninist Maoists. No, they weren't. Marxism-Leninism, Maoism did not even exist at that time. Look at the date. Look at the date of the quote. There was no Marxism-Maoism in 1970. What people do is they confuse Marxism-Leninism, Maoism for Mao Zedong thought, which still forms a very central and important place in the development of China's theoretical and socialism with Chinese characteristics. So don't mistake it for that. Right? Mao Zedong, they were indeed inspired by Mao Zedong. Who wouldn't have been? But they weren't Marxist-Leninist Maoists. That happens later in the 90s. They were inspired by DPRK though. And I want you to take what I just said there about historical materialism and what Kim Jong-il said and listen to hear what Huey Newton says at Boston College 1970. The Black Panther Party is a Marxist-Leninist party because we follow the dialectical method, and we also integrate theory with practice. We are not mechanical Marxists, and we are not historical materialists. Some people think they are Marxists when actually they are following the thoughts of Hegel. Some people think they are Marxist-Leninists, but they refuse to be creative and are therefore tied to the past. They are tied to a rhetoric that does not apply to the present set of conditions. They are tied to a set of thoughts that approaches dogma, what we call flunkyism. Huey Newton, Boston College, 1970. Mechanical Marxism is basically just trying to dogmatically apply the theories that already exist. It's what Khrushchev tries to do. Mechanical Marxism is expressed when someone goes, that's not socialism. Socialism isn't when people are uplifted out of poverty. Socialism is what Marx said in Critique of the Gotha Program. That would be an example. Another mechanical interpretation would be interpreting it to be interpreting dialectical materialism to have biological essentialist characteristics, for example. That would be another mechanical interpretation. In a vulgar materialist one in that case. So what Juche did was it discovered that the social movement, changes and develops according to its own law. The social movement is the movement of humanity, who dominates and transforms the world. Humanity transforms nature to dominate and transform the objective material world. By transforming nature, humanity creates material wealth and material conditions for their life. Transforming nature and creating material wealth is the endeavor to satisfy people's social demands. And this work can only be done through people's social cooperation. People transform society to improve and perfect the relations of social cooperation. It is humanity who transforms both nature and society. While transforming nature and society, humanity transforms and develops themselves continuously. The domination and transformation of the world by humanity are realized, after all, through the transformation of nature, society, and themselves. And the masses of people are the motive force of this undertaking. The masses of the people create all the material and cultural wealth of society, and they develop social relations. The social movement, the driving force of which is the masses of the people, has characteristics which are different from those of the motion of nature. In nature, motion takes place spontaneously, through the interaction of material elements which exist objectively, whereas in social movement is caused by development of volitional action and through the role of the driving force. Therefore, if you apply the principles of materialistic dialectics, which explain the general law of the development in the material world, mechanically, the key word there, to social history, you cannot clarify correctly the essence of the society and the law of social development. The major limitation of the materialistic conception of history is that it failed to correctly expound this peculiar law of the social movement and explain the principles of the social movement mainly on the basis of the common character of the motion of nature and the social movement, in that both of them are the motion of material. Marx's materialistic conception of history broke down society into social being and social consciousness, and attached determining significance to the social being. It also broke down the social structure into productive forces and productive relations, foundation and superstructure, and attached decisive significance to material production and economic relations. This means an unaltered application of the principle.
Let's go, smokes.
Thank you, Meg. This means that an unaltered application of the principle of materialistic dialectics to society, the principle that the world of the material and changes and develops in accordance with the general law of the motion of material, the world viewed by the founders of Marxism when applying the general law governing the material world to social history, is an integrity of not only nature, but also of man and society, in that they are material beings. If you consider humanity as part of the world, a material integrity, not as a social being with independence, creativity, and consciousness, and apply the general law of the movement in the material world to social history, you cannot avoid seeing the socio-historical movement as a process of the history of nature. Of course, society too changes and develops in accordance with a certain law, not by humanity's own will. But the action of law in society is fundamentally different from that of the law of nature. In nature, the law works spontaneously, regardless of humanity's activity. But in society, the law works through humanity's independent, creative, and conscious activities. Some of the laws of society govern every society in general, irrespective of social systems, and some of them govern a particular society. Because all the social laws work through because all the social laws work through humanity's activity, they may work smoothly, or their actions may be restrained or limited, depending on humanity's activity. When I say that social laws function
Juche
through
is what's happening on this planet, y'all.
When I say that social laws function through humanity's activity, I do not deny the objective character of social laws and the possible spontaneity in the social movement. If certain socio-economic condition is created, a social law corresponding to it functions inevitably, and therefore it assumes an objective character as a natural law does. Spontaneity in the social movement is due to a relatively low level of humanity's independence, creativity, and consciousness, and to the absence of the social system under which people can display them to the full. With the growth in humanity's independence, creativity, and consciousness, and the establishment of a social system which ensures the full display of these qualities, humanity will work better in keeping with the objective laws, and the range of spontaneity will narrow. Social development is the process of the development of the masses' independence, creativity, and consciousness. With the growth in these qualities, and with the consummation of the social system capable of meeting their requirements, the society will develop more and more through the purposeful and conscious activities of the masses of the people.
Motherfucker for all motherfuckers everywhere, you know what I'm saying?
That's right. This means that the law peculiar to social movement, which changes and develops by volitional action and role of the driving force, will work on full scale. Although the founders of Marxism established the materialistic dialectical concept of social history, and this is the important part, this is why they didn't get it wrong despite these limitations, okay? This part right here is vital for understanding how many of us can interpret historical materialism correctly and wage a correct revolution using it. Because although the founders of Marxism established the materialistic dialectical concept of social history by applying the general law of the development of the material world to social history, they themselves came across many problems in the practical social movement. Problems which could not be resolved only by the general law of the development of the material world. And that right there, every development following that every lesson that Marx learned through practical experience is exactly what is denied by the orthodox Marxists, who will cite that Gotha program work to you every goddamn time. So they attempted to overcome the one-sidedness of the materialistic dialectical concepts of social history by advancing some theories. For example, that although social consciousness emerges as a reflection of the material and economic conditions, it reacts on these conditions. And that although politics is defined by the economy, it reacts on the economy. However, the Marxist materialistic concept of history is, in essence, a view on social history which considers the common character of the motion of nature and the social movement as the main factor. This theory was unable to avoid the limitation of identifying the process of social development with that of natural history. They're called orthodox Marxists as a way to insult them, basically, because orthodox Marxism isn't something that can exist. So it's a way to make fun of their dogmatism and their flunkyism and call them orthodox Marxists. Because they're like a religious sect, right? They treat Marxism as a prophet rather than creatively applying Marxism to their given conditions. They're the how many Marxists can dance on the head of a surplus value, asking who is part of the working class rather than building a revolution for the working class. The fundamental difference between the Juche philosophy and the preceding philosophy results in the final analysis from a different understanding of humanity. The Marxist philosophy defined the essence of humanity as an ensemble of social relations, but it failed to correctly expound the characteristics of humanity as a social being. The preceding theory explained the principle of the social movement mainly on the basis of the general law of the development of the material world, because it failed to clarify the essential qualities of social humanity. For the first time, the Juche philosophy gave a perfect elucidation of the unique qualities of humanity as a social being, which we talked about earlier today. As clarified in the documents of our party, humanity is a social being with independence, creativity, and consciousness, and nobody has expressed doubt about it. However, some social scientists maintain a wrong view in understanding how humanity became a social being with these qualities. Regarding the question of humanity's essential characteristics, is the issue of the level of his development as a material being. They still assert that the origin of humanity's independence, creativity, and consciousness should be sought in the diversity of the material components and the complexity of their combination and structure. This is, in fact, a view regarding humanity's essential qualities as the extension of a natural and biological attributes, as their development and consummation. That's the mistake that's easy to fall into, as I was talking about earlier, if you compare animals and humanity. When talking about humanity as an organism, one can consider him in comparison with other organisms, or discuss the characteristics of his biological components and their combination and structure. However, the humanity who is deliberated by the Juche philosophy is not only a highly developed organism, but also lives and works with independence, creativity, and consciousness, which no other creature have acquired. The origin of humanity's essential qualities must be sought not in the development of their features common with those of other material beings, but in the characteristics unique to them. Humanity has acquired independence, creativity, and consciousness because they are a social being who forms social collective and lives and works in a social relationship. These qualities of humanity are social attributes, which are formed and developed through the socio-historical process of his working in the social relationships. Of course, these qualities of his would be inconceivable without a highly developed organic body. In the sense of this, the highly developed organic body, humanity can be said to be a high product of evolution and a highly developed material being. However, if humanity had not formed a social collective and had not lived and worked in social relationships, they could not have developed as an independent, creative, and conscious being, no matter how developed their organic body may be. Without physical life, humanity cannot have social political integrity. However, it is not humanity's physical life itself that gives birth to his social and political integrity. Likewise, without their developed organic body, their independence, creativity, and consciousness would be inconceivable. Again, as Lenin said, the thumbs. But their biological characteristics themselves do not produce their social attributes. Humanity's social attributes can take shape and develop only through the process of their emergence and development as a social being. In other words, through the process of the historical development of their social activity and their social relationship. In the history of social development is the history of development of humanity's independence, creativity, and consciousness. This means that humanity's independence, creativity, and consciousness are social attributes which are formed and developed socially and historically. Therefore, the philosophical consideration of man must start from the fact that humanity is a social being. Nevertheless, some of our scientists argue about the material components and their combination and structure, and relate them to humanity's essential qualities, preaching that the biological factors constitute the major content of the Juche philosophy. Their argument is a deviation that explains the Juche philosophy within the framework of Marxist dialectical materialism. It is only an attempt to justify the wrong evolutionary view, which regards humanity's essential qualities as the development and consummation of the biological attributes. Welcome in. Max is stinky. We are reading Kim Jong-il. Regarding humanity's essential qualities, it is important to have a correct understanding of the social being. The founders of Marxism, while raising the question of humanity's essence and social relationship, use the phrase social being as a concept meaning the material conditions and economic relations of social life, which exist objectively and are reflected on social consciousness. Since they regard humanity as a component of productive forces, as an ensemble of social relations, the phrase social being they used implied humanity as well. However, they did not use it as one having the particular meaning that defines humanity's essential qualities. Systematizing the Juche philosophy, we use the social being as one having a particular meaning that defines humanity's essential qualities. In the theory of the Juche philosophy, humanity is the only social being in the world, which, if you want to know what that means in more detail, I explained that earlier. I will cut that out and I'll put that on TikTok and YouTube as well. Because it doesn't mean that other animals aren't social, don't have consciousness, don't have intelligence, don't live in group lives. It's talking about social being, the particular social being that man lives in our way of dominating even other creatures. Some social scientists, however, still insist that social wealth and social relations should also be included in the social being, obscuring the difference between humanity and the social wealth and social relations. Social wealth and social relations are created and developed by humanity. Therefore, they cannot be included together with the concept that defines humanity's essential qualities. When referring to the Marxist philosophy, the phrase social being can, of course, be used as the founders of Marxism meant. But if we understand the term social being in its conventional meaning when referring to the Juche philosophy, it will be obscuring the understanding of humanity's essential qualities. Again, I went way more in depth into that earlier. I will cut that out and upload it. The Juche philosophy is a new philosophy which has its own system and content, so its categories must not be understood in the conventional meaning. One of the main reasons why these social scientists have committed a deviation in explaining and propagating the Juche philosophy is that they have not studied philosophical problems from the point of view of the requirement of revolutionary practice. Oh! You see? So the problem is they are not basing their explanations of Juche based on explaining them being correct according to revolutionary practice, which is how we can prove Juche correct. Instead, you see, they are lost in the sauce, they are disconnected from practice, and so therefore, you see, they are arguing about these philosophical matters that don't even matter, and getting lost as to how to explain Juche. Okay, so should we not characterize Juche as ML? Juche is Juche, and that's why it's called that. I don't know if you got it. You got it right there. Because Juche is a new philosophy. It's a new original philosophy. It has original philosophical principles. It has a new historical mission. Does that mean that it ends Marxism? Does it go up to Marxism and like stab it in the back? You know what I mean? No, of course not. It exists alongside Marxism. You know, we can have we can get more than one philosophy. We can understand more than one philosophy. Whereas Marxism allows us to understand all the objective social laws, or the objective laws which act on social development, because society is a part of the material world. However, Juche allows us to understand what are the particular laws that govern social movement that are overlooked when examining what society has in common with the natural world, such as humanity's level of revolutionary consciousness, right? That's a new discovery that only Juche could accomplish by considering Marxism correct and then asking a new philosophical question: what is humanity's role in the dialectical materialist world? So that's why we also say Juche absolutely could never have existed without dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism gave us the understanding that the law changes according to these material laws. Oh, that allows man to understand those material laws and then change the world accordingly. to use those laws, right? Not as individuals, but as a collective. And so that's what Juche really does. It gets down to the nitty-gritty of, okay, these are the general laws that govern revolution. What are the social laws? What are the immediate problems facing us? And that's why I say, if you study Juche, I think you'll understand how to build a revolution so much better. Because it really does, it spells it out. Going among the people, you know what I mean? Having to focus on ideology, and then technology and material development is right behind that, which explains China and the way that they have developed their revolution. So Juche is also a lens through which you can analyze socialist societies. I actually say, this is what, like I said earlier, instead of using Marxism-Leninism to prove whether China is socialist or whether DPRK is socialist, we should be using Juche. Because Marxism-Leninism allows us to understand capitalism and imperialism better and how to fight it. It doesn't give us a lot of ammo for understanding socialism, because it deals with how to fight capitalism and imperialism. And it gives some general, very, very, very simplified predictions about socialism. Never any really data, because Marx was not a utopian. He literally said, I don't know about this and that about socialism. I don't know about this and that about communism, because I'm not a utopian. The things I do know are these particular economic laws that we know because society exists in the material world. So these economic laws will act on society. Juche then explains everything else, like all of the misinterpretations that sort of, like, think about it this way, even the idea of the masses being able to take hold of the existing bourgeois state, right? We understand that that's impossible, and if we think about it through the Juche lens, we understand why it's impossible. Because the bourgeois state is founded on the ideology of individualism. We have to create new state foundations that are founded on collectivism instead. That's not idealism, that's reality. You see, but because people will try and compare Marxism-Leninism to Juche in that mechanical way, you will say, what we need to do is raise everybody's... I mean, it's funny because you'll say something like that about how the ideological factor is the key to revolution. You say that like Kim Jong-il says, and people will go, what the fuck are you talking about? That's idealism, man. That's a deviation of Marxism, right? But then they'll go out and they'll fucking agitate in a protest, and they'll literally say, we're in a fight to raise the masses' consciousness. We need to raise class consciousness. So they understand it, but they take the most uncharitable interpretation of Juche and want to prove that it's wrong, right? It's funny because they inherently understand that that's an aspect. When they read Marxism, some of them, they go and protest, and they're like, we have to raise the revolutionary consciousness of the masses. And then you say that same thing back to them in Kim Jong-il's words, that ideological factor revolution is the key factor. And they go, oh, that's idealism, man. That's a deviation of Marxism. Like, what are you talking about? Even China, right? We got to point out, what is the difference between, why does China's market socialism serve the people, right? It's because China has a collectivist-based society. It is guided by a party which is putting a collectivist program into place. That's why we can say firmly, with our whole goddamn ass chest, that China is socialist today. China is socialist right now in 2026. Don't worry about the primary stage of socialism thing. That is having to do with a higher stage of socialism. Right now, 2026, and even before this, China was socialist. The market economy, all of this shit that the people, it's got commodity production, it's got a market economy, it's got all of these things that they try and use to disprove it, shows you that they're not analyzing it from this multifaceted view, right? They're just taking an economic view of it. And they're forgetting to ask simple questions like, who does this market economy serve? Who benefits from the market economy in China? What's happening to poverty? Global poverty is reducing because of China, right? And so that's why I say we should try and shed off the habit of analyzing socialist societies through the lens of Marxism Leninism. There's nothing wrong with that to defend it against charges that they're not Marxist Leninist or whatever. But I think we should start arguing against these orthodox Marxists, not on the basis of Marxism Leninism, but using Juche. And using Juche to prove that socialism exists in these countries with those criteria we were talking about before. Yeah, it's signal red. Exactly. And again, that's because what they'll do is they'll read Critique of the Gotha program and say this must be socialism. Which is exactly what Juche combats. It makes those people impossible. It reveals them. Even the ones with those tendencies in your own party who might be staunch Marxist Leninists otherwise, but still have a bit of the tendency of the orthodox Marxists, Juche helps weed them out. But you have to we just got to come to the full understanding of it. I mean, you can see all the misinterpretations that we've talked about today. Right? Like, that's all because of that. And again, that's because, just like he says, it's because they have not studied philosophical problems from the point of view of the requirement of revolutionary practice. And right here, this is the key thing, comrades. If you've not heard anything else about this work, I want you to hear this part right here. Theory must be based on practice and serve practice. A theory divorced from practice cannot correctly elucidate truth and is of no use. Good night. Good night, cat girl staff. Thank you for hanging out. The great leader, Comrade Kim Il-sung, always studied philosophical problems proceeding from the demand of revolutionary practice and evolved the Juche philosophy in the course of giving scientific answers to urgent ideological and theoretical problems arising in revolutionary practice. Our party has generalized the rich and profound experiences of revolutionary practice, systematized the Juche philosophy in a comprehensive way, and developed it in depth. Revolutionary practice is a struggle to realize independence of the masses of the people, and it is the masses who carry out the struggle. Therefore, it is important in the study of philosophy to reflect the demands and the aspirations of the masses correctly. Evolve the theory by generalizing their experiences of struggle and make it the theory of the masses themselves. In the exploitative society, the reactionary ruling class makes use of philosophy for defending and rationalizing their reactionary ruling system, trying to make it the monopoly of the philosophers who act as spokesmen in their interest. They consider the masses of people to be ignorant people who have nothing to do with philosophy. With a viewpoint and attitude that the masses of the people are the masters of everything and the wisest people, our party has evolved the Juche philosophy by reflecting their demand and aspirations and generalizing their struggle experiences, further developed it in depth and made it their weapon of struggle. This is the reason why the Juche philosophy is an absolute truth, which meets the people's desire for and the aspirations to independence and a people-oriented philosophy which the masses easily understand and regard as their own weapon of struggle. However, some of the social scientists are arguing about the questions which are of little practical significance in illuminating the road of shaping the destiny of the masses. Why? Because many of them are infected with that Western bourgeois ideology from studying Western philosophies. We study philosophy essentially for the purpose of clarifying the principles and methodology by which to develop the society and shape the destiny of the masses. The development of society is guided by politics, and it is none other than the Juche philosophy which clarifies the basic principles of politics, which lead social development in the straightest way. In this sense, the Juche philosophy can be called a political philosophy. Some social scientists say that they have explained the Juche philosophy as a philosophy which developed dialectical materialism of Marxism in order to present the Juche idea to suit the characteristic of the external world. We must give a clear understanding of the Juche philosophy as a revolutionary philosophy, not as a mere development of the preceding philosophy. It is a mistake to explain the Juche philosophy within the framework of the preceding philosophy on the grounds that it is presented to suit the characteristic of the external world, or to disseminate the Juche philosophy with ideas which do not accord with the fundamental principles of the Juche philosophy. Moreover, why should we argue about questions which are of no political importance and hardly of any theoretical and practical significance, shutting eyes to the demand of the reality in the international arena, when internationally we have many theoretical and practical questions which urgently await correct answers to be given on the basis of the principles of the Juche philosophy? In presenting the Juche idea to the external world, we must explain correctly, in relation to actual problems, that the Juche philosophy is thoroughly an original philosophy and a new revolutionary philosophy. We must get rid of such deviation, not only in external dissemination, but also in research, study, and education of the Juche philosophy. The Juche philosophy is a revolutionary philosophy and political philosophy of our party, which illuminates the philosophical basis of the Juche idea, our party's guiding ideology, and the fundamental principles of the revolution. How to approach the Juche philosophy does not merely concern philosophical theories, but is related to the viewpoint and attitude towards the party's ideology. We must accept the party's ideology as the absolute truth, defend it resolutely, and keep it as the revolutionary conviction, and thus understand, interpret, and propagate the Juche philosophy correctly. We must feel a great pride and confidence in having such a great political philosophy as the Juche philosophy. Deeply understand its principles and apply them fully to the practical activities of the revolution and construction. We must analyze and judge all the social phenomena thoroughly on the basis of the principles of the Juche philosophy, and dynamically accelerate the revolution and construction by uniting the masses of the people solidly around the party and enhancing the role of the motive force, as the Juche philosophy requires. Our scientists and people must study and follow the Juche philosophy. But they must also know the philosophical ideas of Marxism-Leninism. The social scientists in particular must be well acquainted with the preceding philosophy. In studying the preceding philosophy, it is important to distinguish the limitations and immaturity, along with the progressive and positive aspects. Only when we know correctly not only its historical achievements, but also limitations of the period and the ideal-theoretical immaturity, can we prevent deviations of the dogmatic attitude towards preceding theories, and acquire a deep understanding of the originality and superiority of the Juche philosophy. Social scientists must study and master the Juche philosophy, and on this basis, and in light of its principles, pay deep attention to seeing clearly the limitations and immaturity of the preceding philosophy along with its merits. In addition, we must strictly guard against all heterogeneous trends of philosophy, which are contrary to Juche philosophy, and ensure the purity of the Juche philosophy. The Juche philosophy is the most advantageous and viable philosophy which reflects the demand of the revolutionary practice and the truthfulness and validity of which has been proved by the revolutionary practice. The fact that the Juche philosophy is attracting more attention on the international arena, hey, that's us. We're the Juche philosopher, we're the people that are attracting Juche philosophy more and more in the international arena. That's us. He's talking about us. The fact that the Juche philosophy is attracting more attention on the international arena and the followers of Juche are increasing in number clearly demonstrates that the Juche philosophy gives absolutely correct answers to the questions of revolutionary practice.
Juche is what's happening on this planet, y'all.
Our social scientists must have an unshakable conviction of the scientific accuracy, truthfulness, originality, and superiority of the Juche philosophy, and analyze and judge all philosophical theories with the Juche philosophy as a guideline, thus preventing infiltration of any heterogeneous trend of philosophy into the Juche philosophy. You want to protect against the heteros, chat. All the social scientists must study the Juche philosophy in depth and breadth, and propagate it in line with the party's intention, and, by doing so, exalt its greatness and further increase its attraction.